Hello everyone, this is Kat and I would like to welcome you to Exiting the First Cognition. If you remember from my introduction script, I alluded to different aspects of cognitive growth and that there are other facets to it. What I would like to go over in this script is delving a bit more in depth about something that was, and still is, my greatest habit and inhibitor to overcome when reaching second cog, and that is the thinking mind. So I suppose you're wondering how this pertains to cognitive growth, and what I'm going to try and work on explaining is the difference between the cognitive growth for your consciousness, which is what the second cognition is about, and moving away from the perpetual thinking mind. Cognitive growth for your psyche is not the same as cognitive growth for your mind, and until you begin to understand this through experience and or knowing, you only think you get it from an intellectual standpoint or through first cognition perception. I was pondering about my own thoughts about how destruction has to precede creation. I see many people are drawn to the spiritual side of these teachings, and I assure you I was that way too when I first started out, because chances are, like you also, my psyche resonated with the messages. Like everyone else, when I first started out on my psyche journey in earnest, I still carried the baggage of the first cognition world with me, and I was still operating under the hypeme-infected ego. So while I resonated with these messages, I was only able to understand them on just one first cognition level of understanding. What I mean by this is that the first cognition world is our filters, old habits, and assumed perceptions due to our indoctrination, and this is the baggage that we carry at first. This is the first cognition level of understanding we start out in and have to work to transcend from in order to psyche think and feel. You can only begin to psyche think and feel when or if you're willing to stop thinking like a human. And this is connected to why I said destruction must precede creation. Until you begin to remove these filters and assumed perceptions alongside dropping your personal baggage, you only think you get these messages on just this one level of understanding because you are interpreting them through your own first cognition filters or previous experiences, or lack thereof of experiences. When you begin to have these experiences of what it's like to have your perceptions changed due to genuine inquiry and internal work, then layers are removed so you can truly understand, not intellectually realizing, these messages from an altered perspective. In other words, this gives you a feeling of insight that is knowing, beget by experience. There is a nuisance in the difference between understanding and intellectual realization, and for me, becoming aware of the difference between the two is that understanding is through psyche feel, whereas the realization is solely on an intellectual level without the feeling or knowing of experience. However, how you come to actualize or experience this may be different from how I began to get it. In the second cognition, one begins to work more from feeling rather than thinking. And believe me when I say this, learning this process is still very much a work in progress for me. When I say psyche thinking or feeling, I am speaking of what I can best describe as your intuition. This feeling is not an emotional feeling that is produced by our human forms. It is a sensory feeling of your own psyche or consciousness. In like kind, this feeling is also not produced by our mind, nor is it located within the confines of the brain. So while we may get it from a first cognition and intellectual standpoint, the point I'm wanting to make from my experiences is that the second cognition is more about getting it from a psyche perspective, using your feeling and sensing rather than being dependent on your mind or on your emotions to experience your inner knowings and feels. You are cognitively growing your consciousness, your psyche, not your brain, nor are you cataloging information. Until I finally began to truly realize what true psyche feeling was, it wasn't until in retrospect that I could see the difference between the two because I was so used to being body focused. In other words, I was too used to either using my mind to understand things, or because of the misinformation, I kept mistaking emotion for feel. In both cases, I was using the body as my method of retrieving information and not feel. Throughout the process, my mind kept complicating things for me in some form or another, which made feeling and sensing hard to grasp, which always confused and frustrated me. It was like taking 2 steps forward and then 1 step back. The body is merely a receiver of information, and because of my deeply embedded habit of relying on my mind, the act of collecting information, compartmentalizing, and rationalizing was, and still is, a fucker to break. I still work on this every single day. When I became aware that I reached the second cognition, I recall how elated I was because I was able to look back and truly get it. I was no longer on the outside looking in, and I understand that this was due to not only my experiences, but my willful destruction that allowed my Soika to come to the fore more. View this deconstruction phase as the eroding thinking like a human phase, as that is what it is. It is very hard and confusing to try and both think as a ego-ruled human and as a free Soika being at the same time, because they are opposites. My gradual realization helped me to understand that I am learning and understanding things from a Soika perspective, or more accurately, as a Soika being where I come to know and understand things through feeling rather than thinking. This is currently the best way I can describe what cognitive growth really is and what the second cognition is truly about. And until you begin to willfully let go and question everything, you only think you get it because you are still understanding it from a first cognition perspective. And remember, that level of perception is ruled by authority, and the difference between the first cognition and the second cognition is making decisions to create experiences for yourself rather than others doing that for you. This is integral to the process in beginning to see things from an altered perspective. This is how you start to create your own reality. There are layers underneath layers, and once the first cognition layer of perceiving things is being removed, you truly do begin to see things from a different perspective. This altered state of awareness is what lets you see and understand the second layer of the second cognition, for lack of a better analogy. That understanding, at least for me, was brought by experiences. Experiences created by myself, for myself. To clarify, once you reach the second cognition, all of your first cognition filters and etc. do not simply just vanish and disappear. It is still something that I have to willfully work at every single day to overcome to attain my Soika feeling. But it is worth it, and it is something that I continue to pursue every single day now. Thank you all for listening to me and visiting the Exiting the First Cognition channel. I hope some of you out there found this to be beneficial to your own cognitive advancement. Until then, best of perseverance to you on your journey.